Hello, Run It Once. This is Dan Smith making another video. I've decided to get a little bit meta here and discuss how to study. I've already discussed that in quite a few other videos, so I'm not going to get too much into it, even though I will just say again, in my opinion, it is the most important way to improve. Playing and studying are different animals, so analyzing your actual play, I think, is one of the most important things. Given I've discussed it a lot, I will keep that brief. I think spending your time studying, how you spend your time can make an absolutely huge difference. I think you could be going through the motions and not doing very much, and also choosing what parts of the game to study isn't always super obvious to me. Some things to consider is how likely is the line to come up. Like for instance, button versus big blind, single raised pots, super common. One of the first things I would recommend studying. I suppose it also comes down to the games that you're playing. Like maybe in some games, every pot's going to the flop a bunch of ways. Some things to consider are the size of the mistakes that both you and your opponents could be making. Say you're looking at hands where the big blind has 10 big blinds and peels a min raise. If you're an MTT player, I wouldn't recommend that you spend all of your time on this, because the EV of the mistakes is probably going to be quite a bit smaller. And then also some players size up onto the big blind, and I would feel like the strategies versus a 2x versus a 2.6x are quite different. And for me personally, like more often than not, if I'm going to be like looking at a 10 big blind spot, it is likely with ICM implications. I guess another testament to why hand review is so useful is, say, a 10 big blind spot for chips comes up. I probably will still investigate it. So it's just kind of, it forces you to look at hands that come up. So like they should be coming up at around the right frequencies. But anyway, I am moving on from studying my own hands to, I think reviewing hands of your peers, or more specifically, very good players especially at the formats that you play is useful. I think reviewing hands of your peers, or more specifically, very good players especially at the formats that you play is useful. I mean, I guess it's a little bit different now that people have like pre-flop charts are so easily accessible. But before that was the case, you could see a stream online and be like, this player open folded king 6 off on the button. I would have thought that was a raise. Like, that's a mental note to keep. But anyway, without further ado, I'm going to play this hand of one of my good pals, Henrik Hecklin, versus Punat Puzri. Looks like they are 68 big blinds deep. He raises to 60K at big blind, 25K. Check, and I believe he bets around 80% pot. So I'm going to try to avoid the urge to like go super in depth on any of these hands. I'm going to go a little bit quickly to more so talk about like the concepts of studying, with the benefit of looking this hand up. I believe the big bet with this hand is slightly inaccurate, and you do it with a diamond in your hand. Why is having one diamond important? You block continues, and in particular raises. Say like, trying to think if Henrik would defend King of Diamonds 7, and let's just assume he does for the point here. He would be more likely to raise with a diamond in his hand, so you block raises, or a hand like King of Diamonds 6 could choose to raise, that sort of thing. So you block continues, and also just the added equity and having a candidate to bluff with. Like, if the diamond comes in, the importance of the blocker goes up. I think some poker players have a habit of being overly judgmental to people who are clearly good players, when it's just like, ooh, this person didn't use they used a small size on a big size board. Like, they obviously don't know what's going on. And while that may be true that they didn't know a technical spot or chose to deviate or whatever, it's very not costly to use a wrong size generally. And I also just think it's just not a good headspace to be around poker. Like sometimes I'll see comments about a guy who's been winning at high stakes for 10 years about not being technically sound, and it's just like, the guy's probably doing something right. But again, sorry, I perhaps overindulged on that hand. Faced the larger c-bet, and Henrik calls. The jack gives Henrik the double gutter, and he dark checks. He definitely wouldn't want to be playing leads with his range. The early position player has a big equity advantage and is going to be putting in quite a bit of money with his range, so it just doesn't really make sense. I would say, as far as like pretty new poker players go, taking back the lead inappropriately is one of the most common mistakes that I see, and it probably, as a general takeaway against those sort of players, their checking ranges becomes a little bit disproportionately weak, and you could attack it and check. Punit bets 80% again. I think that is a totally good size. Sure, you could go bigger. I think with a draw this big, you at least have to consider shoving as Henrik. But if I remember correctly, the solver likes the way that he did it. And when you have a lot of candidates to choose from, it's important not to overdo it. And you are shoving for a lot. And I suppose you're mostly representing, say, jacks up a narrow range, and in some of those hands might even choose to call. It wouldn't take very large tweaks to either player's strategy to make jamming 8-9 suited here. Like, it could go... The equilibriums are usually kind of fragile, and if your opponent is possibly going to make some bad bet folds, the jam is going to go really well. I was considering this for chips, and this is a tournament situation with 38 pay. I'm also going much longer on this than I intended to, so I'll just say both plays appear reasonable, and I think favor and call makes sense. And after calling here, Henrik leads out for a 10% pot bet, and
He's going for 100.
Wow.
I've seen these ideas before where we check call the huge draw and then just block all sorts of stuff on the end. And if this gets through, this will be an extraordinary line from Henrik. Yeah, it feels a lot like an ace-10. Oh, he's looking back. He does slide it.
Wow.
What an incredible hand from
and he
Henrik,
shows
and he shows it. My word. Ay.
So like Nick, I do also agree that it was a beautifully and well-executed hand. So when you see a great player make a play that isn't really on your radar, beautifully and well-executed hand. So when you see a great player make a play that isn't really on your radar, I think it is a great time to dive in and try to see what is going on. The solver does like his play. And I generally think it is a way to put some money into the pot while out of position. You definitely have things that you could bluff with. Raising the turn is very expensive, like we said, like when they bet 300, if you have... like making it 800 and folding is challenging, and it's a lot to shove. So this is another way to put money into the pot. So, okay, the first thing I picked up on, I decided to investigate was, is Henrik's line solver approved? And it is. The next question is, does it generate EV? If you look in Pio, you could look at your strategies EV and then compare it in the line where you have the B10 compared to the line where you don't have it. The EV difference was very tiny. So you don't have to implement this play. You're not missing out. In this case, Punit had a pure continue. Interestingly, the computer liked raising his combo, but like raising was the highest EV. I want to say it was generating 1.2 big blinds. Calling was worth 0.6 big blinds on a 4 big blind bet, so not small. He was in an uncomfortable situation and ended up making a mistake. I'm not going to harp on it too much. And also, like 0.6 BB, it's not like he torched his tournament, it's just a little bit of an inaccuracy. But okay, you look into this play, and then you just decide, okay, what hands does it like to do it with? And you see that, okay, it's happening with 22% of range on the end. And the idea is generally, mostly you're value betting, like you can't be bluffing as too high of a frequency. But with a handful of the draws, you get to bluff. And so then when you're deciding, do you want to implement plays like this? And I could see some reasons. If you go back to my first video, the pecking order, it's a concept that I refer to a lot. And I think that versus some players, you try to go down certain avenues, and versus some players, maybe you keep it simpler. I just think it's an important concept, so I keep rehashing it. If you are looking at a play, even if it doesn't generate EV in equilibrium, if you've studied it and your opponent hasn't, it's a big advantage for you. High-level chess is hugely about getting computer preparation that you are prepared with in an attempt to surprise your opponent such that like he is less equipped to deal with it. It's harder to implement in poker because in chess you get to choose what moves go on the board and determine the position. And you can't just decide like, I'm going to start leading into my opponent on monotone boards today. Like you might just not get any, but still conceptually there is merit to it. And I can think of some high roller regulars who do attempt this sort of thing, and I could definitely see the merits of it. It is also just genuinely interesting to me to pursue lines like this. And when something is enjoyable and interesting for me and it doesn't feel like work, that's when I am more it's more easy for me to study. I will elaborate on that towards the end of the video. And there's also, I think, some merit to, okay, you're trying to implement these new strategies. You've studied them a bit. At some point, you're going to have to start trying them out. You are definitely live to make some mistakes in that regard. I feel like in the early solver days that people made a lot of mistakes when they were trying to... Basically, plenty of players, myself included, just started raising early streets, not really understanding why. And I think for plenty of people in the beginning, those were losing plays until they kind of got the hang of it. But then once you see a play like this, now you know to look for it. And in the future, you'll start to pick up on it, and then maybe you can explore it more and then ultimately implement it. And of course, playing the player is still a thing. I think some people are just going to be much more bluffable than other people in this line. So I think that was a very interesting hand. I think that aspect of diving into it is a great way to learn. Another thing that I regularly do if I'm watching a stream is I just ask myself sample hand questions. Like a case in point, there was a hand today that was ace, king, 3, rainbow, cutoff button, single raise pot, and we have a bet and a call. Turn is a queen, putting up a flush draw, bet, call, river, brick. There ended up, this line didn't even happen, but I wanted to investigate versus, say, a half pot bet on the end. Which are the bluff combos that you want? Both which pairs are the most appealing? And is there a difference between the 10 or the jack, or do you just mix? Sometimes top pair is the better candidate, and sometimes, like, if your opponent could just be betting bear, ace, jack there, then I would predict that you don't want the ace, for instance, and then you would want to be blocking the 2-pair combos. So that is a way to be asking yourself those kinds of questions while watching the stream. So it's something that I enjoy, doesn't feel like work for me. So I think that's something that works well for me. So a run at once user sent me a very technical situation where EP went all in for 13 big blinds. He calls, there's a 32 big blind effective jam, 19 to call. He has ace queen suited. Is this a math problem? Feel like small blind's range is jacks plus ace king. Didn't want to burn 20 BB approaching the bubble with the edge on the field. Can't model this on an ICMizer, which I use on my cash game player. But okay, we are in this interesting situation. I will be honest, my initial urge when I heard that hand was like, yuck. Who enjoys doing these sort of, I will call it a math problem. They're very technical. On the other hand, these are situations where a lot of EV can be lost. I guess these things could be counterintuitive. So upon a little bit of reflection and a curiosity to get the real answer, so I've decided to do a deeper dive into this situation where I did 50 left, 37 pay, so like a third of the field has to bust to cash. I took sample payouts from a real commerce tournament, and I am using the beta version here. I made it a couple things that I did. I set a 38 big blind average. I did make a slight inaccuracy. I did 0.1 big blind antes per player, and actually, it's big blind ante. It should be one set of 0.8, but given that it had run for several hours and I'd really been pruning this, I just decided it was close enough. I made the big blind shorter, trying to get under the gun to shove more often. Like in the original version of the sim, it was just happening very infrequently. Shove more often. Like in the original version of the sim, it was just happening very infrequently. I would have thought with a shallower big blind that the shoving is something that you do more often with 10 big blinds than with 13 big blinds. I thought by making the big blind shorter, I I would trick the computer into shoving more often. But no, the initial desire is mostly just to 2x and call if you have to. Building game trees is very challenging. The post-flop game tree I did pretty quickly. So given that this is the situation I was after, so I wouldn't put like a ton of thought into those outputs, but it was still something that I found a little bit surprising. And for my own study, it is something that I will be diving into. But they have this cool feature where you can force it to shove a certain percentage of the time, and then it balances the range for you. And it's still never going to shove like its big pairs. It's going to induce them, but it makes sense that like suited broadways wanting to go all in is a super common thing. Ace king off, ace queen off, and then some pairs. I don't really play these stakes tournaments, mostly because I don't find them fun. And generally, I try to avoid situations where if I got like 6th place for like 6 buy-ins, I'd be pretty frustrated when that's like a quite relatively good result where basically I need to win to be happy. That is just me. Some people can view it more as like, ooh, $1,600 for a chance to win $200,000. Great. Anyway, so my impression, having not played these games in a while, is that there is a thing. Some players aren't going to be finding all of these shoves. I also do think that sometimes you are going to see like much wider shoves. So even in like technical situations, the idea of quote unquote playing the player is still a factor, you know? Some people are going to be shoving a lot wider. Some people are going to be shoving tighter, and it's something to adjust. You can also tinker a lot with the specific hands if you have a guess as to what they are shoving. Some people are tighter, some people are looser, and it's something that you can play around with. This program is very easy to use when you are in push-fold situations, and with ICM splitting off raises, it can get a lot bigger and can still be complicated. But okay, without further ado, so these are the 2 options it has. Rather than 2xing, they went all in. So a way that I like to run my, like in this situation, I thought it would be illustrative to see it both at 30 and 40 big blinds. And rather than run multiple sims, I just put them both in early positions and assume that the ranges are going to be close enough to save myself some work. Something that I was surprised by was that even with like these effective stacks, like Under the Gun 1 wants to split his range between calls and shoves, calling 2.9%, always calling like your best hands for protection, and then calling some of your weaker hands. And I think most notably, seeing that Ace Queen suited wants to re-raise, like rather than call, and it makes sense. It's putting in close to half of his stack, and it's a brutal situation. So shoving Ace Queen suited, and if you shove Ace Queen suited, for instance, you are getting players behind to like fold plenty of good hands, which may or may not happen in game. I mean, some of them for sure, like maybe hijack folding 10s, maybe folding Ace Queen. I don't know. But so I'm going to go to this jam. So this is another situation where, notably, MP wanted to split its range, and I would have expected off of 40, when you are calling such a tight range, that you could like ace jack suited plus eights. Your range is fairly protected here. I had expected to see just calls with range, and if somebody shoves behind, like it could be unfortunate, but if you have ace king offsuit or jacks, you can just like shrug and play a huge pot. So I took away the range splitting, and I forced MP to continue only by calling. Overcall situations can get dicey, and I'm going to avoid them for the sake of this video. But in the event that under the gun jam, MP calls, button jams, then you call off queens plus ace king, which seems sensible. I would have thought that in the event that like multiple players do go all in, that to the point where like one of them just has to have a bigger pair, that I thought would be a interesting factor. Okay, and so I think a very pertinent question is like, okay, the player behind us, jacks plus ace king suited, goes for it. MP still calls off with this range. So I thought solving the hand this way could have been more illustrative. And even in this scenario where the hijack is exactly jacks plus ace king, MP is still committed to calling off those 19 BB, even though it is a larger portion of his stack. So in the actual hand, the player called off of like 75 blinds and had to call 19 more. And interestingly, it is indifferent. I think even with the program, it could be challenging to know what various stacks are worth with future games. I discussed this a little bit in my previous video where I review the hand against Ben Tollerene about the shortcomings of ICM. I don't think it's always so black and white. I think there are some other variables. Like, I think something that people don't think about as much, some people just play big stacks better than others, you know? Some people are very good at applying pressure, but it's not as simple as you just get to open every hand, you know? Because, okay, you're raising a lot, but you have a weak range. What if players behind call you or 3-bet you, and then like now you are forced to go to war with weaker hands? I also think that there are some tables where you are going to accumulate chips more easily, and in those maybe gambling, like being more willing to gamble for a stack would be worth it. I had a large hand where Doug Polk in the money of the Triton main event in London. He open shoved like 22 blinds, and I called with queen 10 suited. There were maybe 20 players left in the tournament. Based on Doug being a heads-up player, doesn't play that many tournaments, I thought he would be shoving wider than equilibrium. And 4 chips, like queen 10 suited, isn't even close. It was a call by like over a big blind. Of course, it does have some very specific hands in the small blind jamming range, which could make a difference, but does make a difference. But generally, I expected to see enough bad hands that I'm doing quite well against, and my table was quite tough. The 2 players on my left were Chidwick and Haxton, so I was imagining like me playing. Like, I tried to estimate my big blind per 100 at that table. My expected earn in future hands was not so high, such that I felt the need to like pass up on decent edges. We also were in the money in a fast structured tournament where like maybe Average was 35, 40 blinds. And I thought being in a situation of accumulating chips before the ICM pressure built up had some merit. I discussed a little bit how the computer did want to split off ranges. I suppose I should just add, in some of these situations where, like, let's see if I could pull it up, but it appears like it's going to be under the gun raises, EP. Okay, the example wasn't unbelievably extreme, but I can imagine some situations where the computer wants to split off, say, like aces, kings, and ace-queen offsuit. And I think there would be some merit to the idea of your opponents could just sniff out that you have, like, either you have the absolute top of your range, or your opponents could just sniff out that you have, like, either you have the absolute top of your range or the absolute bottom of your range. And I would at least put some thought into, are you worried about any of your opponents sniffing that out? I think from there, we'll move on. And I'm going to wrap this video up by generally discussing my routine. You may have noticed I a few times talked about trying to implement study methods that I enjoy. If you enjoy something and it's going to be easy for you to go through the motions, you're going to put in way more time and probably get more out of it compared to if you're like continuously waiting, looking at your watch, just being like, I just want my 30 minutes of study to be over. And I will just mention a few things that I do that I could find people might find useful. I go through periods where sometimes when I'm waking up and having my coffee, I drill a set number of hands. Sometimes I try to gamify them where I just try to get the best score that I can, which is losing the least EV. I try to sometimes make my study in game type environments where if like, okay, I'm trying to predict which river blockers are the best, I will do it with, say, 30 seconds. Then if I choose to use a 30-second extension to like really simulate the game environment. And along the same train of thought, I do sometimes try to force myself to study when I'm tired, just to like, I think that's when my biggest mistakes, everyone's biggest mistakes, are more likely to happen, and just to get some practice at forcing yourself to think when the wheels are turning. Generally being aware of your strengths and weaknesses as a person and a poker player, I think can have big impacts on your study methods. I think some people can look at charts and put them to memory quite easily. I generally struggle with that sort of thing. I don't think my memorization is like, I would guess it's below average for very strong poker players, but I'll have shortcuts for myself. Like, just one off the top of my head is like, it's challenging to remember every combination hijack versus button when you're calling a 3-bet, right? I just once ingrained like, okay, 10-8 suited in that spot is indifferent for chips. And from there, I can extrapolate a lot of other similar spots where, okay, maybe in some cases I misevaluate like king 6 suited versus 10-8 suited. But if I face a smaller 3-bet or a bigger 3-bet or a tighter player or a weaker player, like I'm pretty comfortable at like being calibrated. So I have those general shortcuts in my head such that when decision time comes along, I'm more prepared to execute. And lastly, I will just encourage people to be mindful of what they study. I think human nature is to continuously work on the thing that you are the best at. And in those cases, like the incremental gains will be much smaller, where if you're studying something that you're weaker than, even though it might be like a little bit more frustrating as you do it, there'll be more to be gained from it. In particular, I've seen a lot of people just kind of talk about how they aren't math players who can't really figure out the certain short stacked mechanics. And of course, some people have it easier than others, like maybe more comfortable around numbers, or it's just like more intuitive, that sort of thing. Even if you're bad at it, the work is going to go even a longer way. This was quite a different video than I usually make. As always, please share your comments and let me know what you liked and didn't like. And good luck at the tables. Take care.